Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today's episode of the Jai Dave Show is sponsored by the Life Force Academy. The Life Force Academy is the ultimate home Kundalini Yoga experience. If you want something in your life that you can use anytime to reboot your body, your mind, to recalibrate so you feel good, no matter if the stress is getting really high in your life or really heavy, you need something to keep you going, to keep you feeling inspired and living with a sense of purpose. Check it out, the Life Force Academy. Whether you've never tried Kundalini Yoga before or you're a longtime practitioner, there's something for everyone in there to keep your practice fresh, to keep you inspired, to keep you feeling good in your body, clear mind, open heart, living with a real sense of purpose. Check it out. As a listener of this podcast, you can get a 14-day trial for just $1 to the Life Force Academy by going to lifeforce.yoga. Just simply type that into your browser. The URL is lifeforce.yoga. And as a listener of this podcast, you'll be able to get a $1 14-day trial to the Life Force Academy. And now for our episode with the great Oz Fritz. Oz Fritz is a gentleman that I've known for a little while now. But before I knew him, I had heard about him a lot. He lives actually in the same community I live in Northern California. And from time to time, you'd hear about this guy, Oz. He's a Grammy Award winner. He won a Grammy for doing sound engineering on a Tom Waits album, actually. And he's worked with many, many incredible musicians and incredible artists over his long career in sound engineering, production, live sound, and you're going to hear about some of that in this conversation. But as with all the conversations I have on this podcast, I'm primarily interested in talking to people who are using whatever the medium of their craft is as a way of concentrating life force, of awakening consciousness, and Oz is the perfect candidate for that because Oz is an interesting guy. I call him like a sound wizard. And he's definitely a brother who is into consciousness and into magic in the real sense of the word, and into working with sound and working with energy and working with life in order to, produce beautiful things and good things and things of consciousness and love. And he's a real interesting guy. I think you're going to enjoy this a lot. So, eventually we met Oz because he has begun to work with Simrit over the last couple of years. And in fact, over the last few Simrit tours, he has traveled with them and he has been doing the live sound for the Simrit tour. And as most of you know, Simrit is my wife, and some of you may not know that, and some of you may not know Simrit yet. If you don't, definitely check her out at simritkaur.com. SIMRITKAUR. So Oz has been traveling with the Simrit band, so I've gotten to know him a little better. But I really hadn't had a deep conversation, a lengthy conversation with him, I should say, until we sat down to do this podcast, and I really enjoyed talking with him. He's a really incredible person, and I hope to have him on the Jai Dave Show more often, because I could talk to him for a long time about a lot of different things. A really intelligent guy, really interesting guy. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Oz Fritz. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, just naturally. I've been wanting to have a conversation with you. And I initially had heard your name here and there. Yeah. Just around town and amongst other musician friends. And I had heard like it was almost like you're some mythical figure is what the vibe was around. Yeah. Who is this guy, Oz? And it was all high praise, but also like, he's also, there was like some sort of mystic aspect to even really? Like how people talked about you. Okay. And so I was immediately, that piqued my interest. And I tried to look you up online a little bit, but there wasn't a whole lot that I could find. But I did find your blog, and I started reading some of those posts.
Oh, cool.
And then we found out that you were across the street, engineering at a recording studio across the street.
That's right,
from...
yeah. Ancient Waves, Saul and Elena's place, yeah.
Right, Ancient Waves. And that's where Simrit and I used to live, across the street from that recording studio. So
right.
we had the opportunity to meet. And then turns out over time you ended up working with Simrit and have been doing her sound engineering on her live tours.
Right.
So anyways, I'm happy all that happened because...
Yeah, me too. It's been a great connection with both you and Simrit.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the more I've gotten to know you a little bit, the more I've wanted to chat with you a little more in depth. So happy to be doing this.
Oh, yeah. You're welcome.
So you originally are from Canada, is that right?
No, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and lived there until the age of 9. My dad was taking a doctorate in physics, and after he got his degree, he went to California for a year, and we lived in Palo Alto when I was in the 3rd grade from the age of 9 to 10, and then we moved to Canada, and I grew up in Canada from then on.
Your dad was into physics?
He was he researched biophysics, and he was a physics professor, and
oh, wow.
He got a job at the University of Calgary.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Were you influenced a bit by your dad?
I think so, very much so, by my mother and father. My dad gave us a skeptical point of view, and he kind of taught us how to think for ourselves. We would come home, we would always have the family dinner, and he would say, "What did you learn in school?" And I'd say, "Well, we learned this, this, this." And he'd say, "Well, how do you know that? How do you know the teacher wasn't lying to you?" Or,
That's cool.
Yeah, so to always kind of question what's presented as fact.
Uh-huh. You had brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have 2 brothers and a half-sister.
Uh-huh. So your dad's a physics professor?
He was. He died in 94, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And what was Mom like?
She ended up getting a master's in psychology and ended up administrating a daycare center for handicapped adults.
Oh, wow.
But our family split up when I was 11, and she was the one that moved out. The children stayed with my father. And that was in 1970 or something like that, and she became like a social worker, and they were all basically hippies. So she kind of, my parents were what we would call square back then. They were pretty conservative. And my mother became, involved in the counterculture when she left the family. So she got involved in great music. She turned me on to the Rolling Stones and Jethro Tull and all this great music when I was really young. And
before the family split up?
No, afterwards. My mom became kind of a different person when she moved out, and she would come back and her time with the kids, she was far more indulgent in a way in us. Like she let us do what we wanted, and she turned us on to stuff that I wouldn't have been turned on to through my father.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, she smoked pot, which was extremely liberal for someone
right, because
in
what
that
year
background.
Is this?
1970.
Right.
Yeah.
I see. Wow. So, that's a pretty cool combination of influences.
Yeah.
So you're with your dad up in Canada.
Yeah.
And so when do you start getting your mom introduce you to some cool music?
Yeah.
What do you remember as being like the earliest music that really hit you, like in an inspirational type way?
That's a really good question, and I would just have to say there was the first LPs that we were given. My brother and I. My brother's birthday was 2 months after mine, and I was given the Beatles' Abbey Road, and he was given the Beatles' Let It Be. So it was the Beatles. But prior to that, I would say that would be my 11th birthday. And before that, at the age of 9, I took up playing the trumpet. And I played trumpet for 5 or 6 years. But, the key word in your question was what inspired you. And playing the trumpet did not inspire me in the least. Just because there was I wasn't into the music. It was all kind of...
it's like school band?
School band, yeah. Yeah, and I was in a marching band, and we played in parades and stuff like that. And it was fun, you get to tour, and you get to spend time away from home with a bunch of friends and stuff, and you are playing music, but I was never inspired to keep on with it. So I gave it up as soon as I got into high school.
I see.
And then high school was a period of mainly exploring music for me. I mean, that and socializing, hanging out with my friends, and occasionally going to classes.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. Getting a little ahead of ourselves, but this reminded me of something that I heard in another interview that I heard you being interviewed, and I would have never ever remembered had this memory, but the story you told triggered it. And that was when I was, I don't know how old, but really pretty young, and I was with my grandparents in the Detroit area. We had gone to visit, and they brought us to like the shopping mall, and you could still go to the mall and buy cassettes. Yeah.
Right.
And each one of us were able to pick out an album. Yeah. And my choice indicates to me I was pretty young. I was still really young. Because I remember my brother chose this Twisted Sister album. Okay. And I chose this wrestling album. Right. I don't remember what it's called, but you may remember because I heard on the interview that you were actually...
The assistant engineer.
You were the assistant engineer on that album. Yeah. It was like a WWF, like it was some cheesy, I don't know. I don't have any...
That was it. Yeah, the WWF 2. It was the second one. It was an earlier one.
That was really a cool, just kind of, there would have been no reason for me to ever remember that. Yeah. But when I heard it, it's like, oh my God, I had that album.
Right. But just when you're talking about this now and you say, when you could still buy cassettes, well, that sort of dates you a little bit, but what dates me is I can remember when cassettes came out. Right. And I was very influenced by a friend of mine who we were the same age, but he was kind of a genius, and he also had older brothers, so he was turned on to a lot of cool stuff from his older hippie brothers. And he was way into audio. He's kind of responsible for getting me into audio. And one of the things he convinced me to buy was a really deluxe cassette player that was like the big thing at the moment. Yeah.
So when you got, what album was it? Abbey Road, or your brother got Abbey Road?
No, mine was Abbey Road.
Abbey Road. So that was a record.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Because you're 19. When are you? When is that?
71, 70 or 71. Yeah.
Okay, so were you into the Beatles?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And so now you're in high school. You're exploring music. That's would you say really the central pivot of your life at that point is music?
Well, that and surviving. I didn't get along with my dad, and also I was a little bit of a juvenile delinquent. Nothing too serious, but we used to sneak out at night and take our parents' cars and go hot rodding and stuff. And my dad was a functioning alcoholic, so there was a lot of tensions. And so from the age of 14, I had planned for 2 years that I would move out exactly when I turned 16, because then I wouldn't be a runaway. And so I was able to get an apartment, and I was the guy with the big stereo. And I was everyone would come over and listen to music and stuff. And so I would, I was working at a McDonald's restaurant at night while going to school some of the time during the day. And it was all about music. That was the central focus. I went to my first concert when I was 15. It was the Doobie Brothers. And just a little aside, on the last Simrit tour, we went and toured in areas where I grew up. In Canada, yeah. We started out in Edmonton and went to Calgary, which is where I grew up. And the hotel we stayed in was right across the street from McMahon Stadium, where I saw my first concert. So it was like kind of a nostalgic thing.
That was the Doobie Brothers.
That was the Doobie Brothers. And
was that a good experience?
It was half good because the Doobie Brothers kind of changed course right then. They hired a guy named Mike McDonald, and they started going really. Mike McDonald's got a really super smooth voice, and they became super LA sounding. And before that, they were kind of more rock and roll, and we were into sort of the rock and roll. So I enjoyed about half the concert.
I see.
My second big concert I remember was on my 17th birthday, and it was festival seating, so I went 3 or 4 hours before, and it was Jethro Tull, and that was my first mind-blowing concert. And I can't remember the name of the opening group, but it was a trio with Terry Bozzio as a drummer, and there was this amazing electric violin player who was the lead instrument. And so that was the first, big live music event. But even before that, so at the drinking age in Canada at that time was 18, and at 16 we were able to sneak into the bars, which was mainly to see live music. So I got the live music bug then, just the energy of seeing these performers on stage. And there were 2 main bars we went to, and one was rock and roll, and then the other one was sort of country music, because it was Calgary, Cowtown. It's got a very strong cowboy influence.
Yeah. So at what point does your interest in music take a at least semi-professional turn? When does it turn into something you will start to actually craft?
Well, it was an epiphany. I was doing things that you do at that age, 17, 18, and my friend and I hitchhiked down to California and saw a lot of things, and came back and got a job. His dad was a millwright, which is heavy-duty construction. He got me a job as an apprentice, and I'm totally unsuited for it. And I was making a lot of money for what I considered a lot of money, but just really not happy with it. And so I quit, and I was at because growing up in Canada in the 70s, Canada is like about 5 years behind the times, and so it was almost like the 60s for then. And my friends and I had very strong social consciences. We were all going to go start a commune after we got out of high school and all this stuff. We were basically hippies, although we called ourselves freaks. And so I was taking this massive amount of money I had, which was about $3,000, and going to join something like the French Foreign Legion or some kind of thing, because I wanted it to, 2 things I loved doing was traveling and listening to music. And so I was going to travel, hopefully to Africa, and build schools for the third world countries. And so that was my plan. And I was living in a house where there was a number of people, and there was one of them had a band, and they rehearsed in the basement. And I was still, my fascination for live music, I was just always the guy who was always there. I was like a groupie, basically. And after one of their practices, my friend Mark, the leader of the band, asked me what I was going to do, and I told him about these plans, and he says, "No, Oz, no, we got something else for you." And then he said, "Well, we got a gig, and we need someone to help us with sound and lights, and would you like to do that?" And sure, that'd be great to participate in this. And so I went and did that, and after the first week, I had no clue that this would be a potential career.
You knew nothing of how to do any of that at that point?
Absolutely not. Yeah. No, it was just, I think at one point I was a manager of a rock band or something, but I had no idea that you could get in there as a sound engineer.
Yeah, to me, sound engineering is an intimidating kind of thing to penetrate.
Yeah.
And I have a little experience of attempting to do that, because when I graduated high school, I was looking for a major. I knew I was gonna go to college, but I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Right.
And all these majors just seemed terrible to me. The most interesting one I could find was anthropology.
Oh yeah. That's cool.
It is cool, but then what? Yeah. And
right.
it didn't seem like something that I wanted to pursue professionally. So then I found this school, Middle Tennessee State University, and they had a production in the recording industry major.
Oh really?
Yeah. So it was just outside of Nashville.
What year was that?
That was 99.
Okay.
Yeah. And I went there. And I went there for about a year and a half. And but there you have to, because it's a university, before you even get into the studio classes, you have to, take history of the recording industry.
Oh, wow.
Copyright law in the recording industry.
Oh, it sounds like a fascinating course.
Yeah. If I was a little more mature in terms of my life experience, I think like now I would really probably eat those classes up. I liked it, but I just wanted to get into the studio. I didn't want to study copyright law.
Right. Sure.
So anyway, by the time it takes about a year before you can even start those, and then in between that happening, I took my first yoga class, and that changed my trajectory.
Yeah.
So anyways, I was in those classes, and I did take like a Pro Tools class. And I felt just so, what's the word? Just overwhelmed by like, where do you even begin with sound engineering? And I felt like it was just a difficult thing to kind of penetrate into. Yeah. And it almost seems like you just got to kind of jump in and learn by doing it. It seems very difficult to study. Yeah. Is that true?
Yeah, no, I can tell you a story because I went to recording school. I did 4 years of live sound, and then I decided I was hit the ceiling in the market I was in, and I moved to New York and went to a recording school. And it was a year program. It was called the Institute of Audio Research, and it was affiliated with NYU. So if you wanted to have a 4-year music program, that could be 1 year of your music degree at NYU. And it was all theoretical, and it was all great, but the actual amount of practical time in a recording studio was in the last quarter, and it was like maybe 3 or 4 hours a week, and then there's a class of 10 or 15 people, so you're not getting any hands-on time. So fast forward a few years later, when I actually seriously pursued working in the recording studio, I got an internship at one, and I remember being in the room and just looking at all the equipment and going, my God, how am I ever going to learn all this? So, you have to, I would say, get an internship at a working place, and then you get to see how the professional people do it. That's what I did anyway.
At what point did you start to explore mysticism type things? When I'm listening to you, even when you're saying as a teenager you were wanting to travel, you were considering going to Africa, and doing kind of social work style things down there. Already that kind of says you're definitely, it sounds like you had kind of a pursuit of purpose, or doing something with meaning. Yeah. I wouldn't know where to pinpoint it. I know that at 17 I had a profound dream where I was climbing this rock wall, and I knew that when I got to the top I would see the ultimate meaning of everything. And that kind of told me myself that I was looking for the ultimate meaning of everything, and I think it had to do with the music. My first anything to do with mysticism came from music, as far as I remember. The clique I hung out with in high school were huge Led Zeppelin fans, and all the mysticism associated with that. And it turns out Jimmy Page had been into mysticism from the age of 11, and so I think a lot of it was absorbed in their music and then passed it on to people. Yeah, the Jimmy Page. You're very much into Lester Crowley. Yeah, and Jimmy Page, didn't he own the previous home of Aleister Crowley? Is that correct? Aleister Crowley, yeah. Yes, Jimmy Page bought, it's called Boleskine Manor. It's on Loch Ness in northern Scotland. Aleister Crowley had bought it because there's a ritual called the Holy Guardian Angel, that the traditional ritual is to seclude yourself for 6 months, and then there's all kinds of parameters of how you're supposed to set up your living space and do this for 6 months. And he bought that house for that purpose, and then
other circumstances happened that changed his course. But he owned that house for a number of years, and Jimmy Page bought it. Jimmy Page also bought a bookstore called the Equinox in London, and he probably had people run it for him, but it was basically to help acquire these rare manuscripts, these occult manuscripts.
Yeah, it's pretty significant what music transmits to the culture.
Yeah.
And I wonder, how much, a lot of it I think gets pinned on, especially like in the 60s, psychedelics.
Yeah.
And certainly that played an important role in changing consciousness in the Western world.
Yeah.
The music, though, and because, I know a little bit about, your interests in magic and mysticism and so forth. And in yoga, the sound is really the fabric of existence.
Yeah.
And so that, makes me really think about, in terms of music, just something as simple as these are like rock and roll songs,
right?
And yet they do so much more than especially when you have a band or a musician, Jimmy Page or the Beatles, going out. And we were just my son and I went to Rishikesh last year.
Oh wow!
And so we went to the ashram where the Beatles hung out.
Right.
And they wrote a lot of the White Album there.
Yeah.
And it was almost like a pilgrimage just to go there, because even though I'm much younger and wasn't alive when that album came out, it still influenced me fairly profoundly when I was in high school.
Yeah. And
it just seems so significant what music provides to society, and on a level that I think is underneath the surface. Well, you can say music brings everybody together and it's a universal language, but then there's something even on a much more subtle level that I think it's doing.
Yeah.
And what is your experience of that, though?
Let's see. That's kind of a big question, and I'm trying to figure out where to start. But
Sure.
I just want to start with getting back to an earlier question about what got me into mysticism. Because I have a yoga background too, and going to high school and living on my own and not knowing a clue about nutrition or that, and doing a fair amount of this cannabis products were really strong up there, and there was a lot of psychedelics. So I did a lot of that, and I got kind of anxious, and I was looking for ways to get myself together, and that's where I discovered Hatha Yoga. And then yoga became a very important part of my mystical journey and search. And one of the things I was attracted to Aleister Crowley about is that yoga is one half of his system. It's he combines the East. He was a pioneer in that regard of these Western Hermetic magicians bringing in Eastern influences of yoga and Buddhism and stuff like that. That was kind of one of the breakthroughs that he designed or he pulled off. But in terms of the music transmitting, I totally agree with you, and it's my working hypothesis based on my experiences that when you record music, you're not only recording the audio frequencies, but you're recording the mood that's in the space, which translates into you're recording the states of consciousness, because that's what's creating the mood. So there's something, that's why I think the environment of a recording is as important as the technical aspect of it. And so when I was 17, the movie The Song Remains the Same came out, Led Zeppelin, and it was also the beginning of my first explorations into psychedelics. And once a week for 7 weeks, I saw that movie on, a shamanic assisting factor, as we call it. And I really believe that opened me up to...
Just like at home? That's what you were doing?
No, this was at a movie theater.
Oh.
This is, we're talking the a primitive age. There was no VCRs or anything, right? And,
okay.
And in Canada, you know, like American television was like an amazing thing. Like you had to have cable to get American television.
I
so
see.
so this was in a movie theater.
And it was playing for a number of weeks, and you went once a week?
For 7 weeks,
for 7 weeks.
Sometimes by myself, sometimes with friends.
Yeah.
And then, you know, getting into Aleister Crowley deeply and penetrating a lot of his stuff and with help from other people and that. And I realized it is so embodied. Like Stairway to Heaven is like an ideal song of Crowley's philosophy.
Really?
Or that philosophy he presented, because I personally like to separate his work from the man himself, from the personality himself, because he had a lot of high ideals, but he was also hedonist, and he didn't live up to the ideals that he presented, but he did do his job.
Not uncommon.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all try to reach for beyond our capacities, and you know, that's part of you know, growing. Mm-hmm. But the song remains the same. That's another very strong thelemic. That's the name of Crowley's religion.
Well, what is the word again? Thelemic?
Thelemic, yeah. Thelema. Thelema is a Greek word, and it means will. And Crowley was into a language called Kabbalah, which is a language of imagery. And it also, you can transduce letters into numbers. And so every word that has a particular number, if it adds to that number, then it's equivalent. So the word thelema also means love. That in Kabbalah, that in Greek Kabbalah, that's how it translates. So in his mind, it meant love under will, which means love that's directed, love that's has a purpose or an intention.
Yeah, I have so many questions. But we'll just start with one. Well, first of all, so how old are you when you're turned on to Aleister Crowley? Approximately
22, something like that. Yeah.
I see. So, and you've been into. And how? So you're getting books on him? You're able. Here's one of the questions I want to ask you. Crowley's there's like a little bit of a stigma around him that even I had. Was most of my exposure to him was very, first of all, as a young person, very superficial.
Yeah.
I knew about the Jimmy Page connection.
Yeah.
I had heard the Ozzy Osbourne song.
Right.
But other than that, until I was much older, I didn't really have any real substantive understanding of what he was doing, who he was, or anything.
Yeah.
Now I have much different level of appreciation for him, and still my knowledge and understanding of what he was all about is fairly superficial.
Yeah.
I haven't taken the deep dive. Sounds like you've taken the deep dive.
Yeah.
So why is it that there's a bit of a stigma around him?
I think he scared a lot of people. He was kind of the first rock star. He was the first one to do a lot of experimentation with drugs and consciousness and
when did he
sex and consciousness, and there's a two taboo. You know, we're talking about the end of the Victorian era when he came out, so it was a lot different than it is now. But some people credit him for the 60s, for the counterculture breakthroughs and revolutions of the 60s.
The other question I had for you was regarding Kabbalah and how it's often popularly contextualized like mystical Judaism.
Right.
Was it contextualized when he was using Kabbalah or teaching Kabbalah or however it was being transmitted? How was it contextualized in that? Did it have anything to do with Judaism?
Yes, it does, but it's his version of it, which I would call unorthodox, is far broader than Judaism. It's based on the Hebrew alphabet,
right,
and the tree of life, which.
So it's still the Kabbalah 10 Sefirot.
Yeah,
and how it's taught. And so what do you
mean? The paths between them are the 22 paths, and each path connects with a Hebrew letter.
I see. And it's also connected to tarot as well, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
But see, that's all Crowley. That's there's actually a guy named Eliphas Levi. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but he was a French magician around the mid 1800s. Crowley believed he was the reincarnation of him, but he was the one that first associated the tarot with the tree of life. Crowley felt he got it all wrong, but he also felt that he deliberately did it wrong to throw off people. Crowley was the first one. Crowley's teacher was a guy named MacGregor Mathers. MacGregor Mathers was one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, which was a very influential English mystical Masonic fraternal organization starting out in the late 1800s. It had W.B. Yeats was a member, Arthur Machen, who's a writer, was a member, and a number of British intellectuals. And that was Crowley's first magic school. And so,
can we pause for a moment, just because I don't want anyone to get tripped up on the word. How do you define magic?
I use Crowley's definition: the science and art of causing change to occur in accordance with will.
The science and the art of causing change to occur
in conformity with will.
In conformity with will.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not an unnatural science. It's using natural laws.
Yes.
Right. I think that's important to
Yeah.
kind of clear. It's such a word that gets used in so many different ways. So when
Yeah.
we're talking, because I have some people I know who I never really used the term magic, but when I started to learn about how some people were using the term magic, and I was reading a book called Modern Magic.
Yeah.
Magic with a K.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, how they're defining magic here is exactly what we do in Kundalini Yoga. Essentially,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
contextualized. So anyways, keep going. I just wanted to get the magic thing.
Okay, well, I'll finish that question and go back to the other one. There are basically two kinds of magic: thaumaturgic, and theurgic. And thaumaturgic is magic that's concerned with trying to change or influence the environment, trying to change the weather, trying to cast a love potion or something like that.
I see.
Theurgic magic has to do with raising consciousness or mystical union with God or whatever. And the kind that Crowley practiced all kinds, but the main kind was theurgic. It was about trying to raise consciousness, and he was trying to raise the consciousness of the planet. That was the goal.
Okay, important distinction there.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of nonsense associated with magic, and it sort of has to do with people putting curses on each other or whatever, trying to influence their make their lives better or whatever. But getting back to the Kabbalah question, so Crowley took MacGregor Mathers, who was his teacher, started compiling a Kabbalistic dictionary, and Crowley was the one who put it all together with another associate of his.
Do you think his work has influenced Kabbalah in general in terms of how people are understanding Kabbalah now?
Yeah, because the main reference book is still his.
It's his?
Yeah, and his tables and stuff, yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this is cool. I mean, one of the most important things I think that interests me in regards to you and your work is this intersection between, and we've kind of crossed them now, at least in somewhat in your timeline, is the intersection between working with sound, and mysticism, magic, and that to me is just I could talk to you all day about that, but. Earlier you mentioned that, in terms of recording, you said the environment, was, how do you put it, at least as important, if not more important?
Yes.
Yeah. So how, as like a engineer, do you influence the environment in a recording studio to try, well, part one of that question, how do you do it? And part two is, what are you trying to do?
That's a great question. So in magic, you learn how to create a space. The kind of magic, theurgic magic, when you apply that to a ritual, it's called invocation. and there's a particular procedure for doing that. And the first thing is to draw a circle around your working and the rest of the universe, and you want to keep all distractions out.
Energetically draw a circle, or literally draw?
Well, you would, in magic they do literal stuff, so it is energetic, but you're doing it literally. You're taking your wand and you're making pentagrams in the 4 quarters, and you visualize a connecting link. So it's kind of both. But this is where it gets back into Kabbalah. So say that you're wanting to invoke the spirit of Mars or some particular kind of energy. So you would look up all the correspondences to Mars in your Kabbalah dictionary, and you would, it would say, well, the color red, so you might have red things around, red candles or something. And you just get really creative, and you try to create a space that's conducive to what you're trying to do. So for me in the recording studio, I took, you're always, and this is one thing Crowley teaches, is that you're improvising. There's not a literal dogma about how to go about and do it. So I just tried to create a more aesthetic environment in the studio, putting up paintings, pictures, devotional art and stuff like that. And because music is invocational also. I mean, these musicians are trying to draw down. Invocation means to draw down something from above. And so they're trying to draw, they're projecting their consciousness out there into the world of musical possibility, and they're trying to connect to it and draw something in. And that's where I think you have people like Led Zeppelin and others. Bob Dylan is another one where they worked very invocationally. It was just be open to the influence and let it come through. And things can come through that are way beyond your ken of knowledge, your conscious knowledge. And
that's really cool. I've been on a bit of a Bob Dylan trip in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Just now that everything's available on these streaming networks.
Right.
As much as I am still getting used to it.
Yeah.
What's it, Spotify, etc. But then one of the nice things about it is I can type in Bob Dylan and every Bob Dylan album is there.
Right.
And so I just was playing them on a recent road trip and listening to his poetry.
Yeah.
It's just like, where is this coming from? But that's where it's coming from, isn't it? Invocation.
Yeah, it's invocation, and I don't think he knew everything that was coming through. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. What is evocation? You said invocation and evocation.
Evocation is when you're drawing something out from within.
What's an example of that? Evoking something.
Yeah. Well,
is that what most people are doing? Is evocation as opposed to invocation in terms of popular music? Or am I getting the terms mixed up?
No. I would say in terms of popular music, they're attempting to evoke something.
Some emotion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You want to, talking about a breakup, you're evoking the sadness and the heartbreak of that emotional experience.
Yeah.
I see. Invocation, though, you described as you're drawing something from above down into the physical plane or into the our reality.
Yeah, exactly. It's what I would call the shamanic work of the shaman goes out there into the great unknown and finds something and then brings it back. And that's why musicians are such a powerful force in our culture, I believe, because they have a way of translating this knowledge that they receive. They have like a format that they can put it into that they can then communicate to other people.
So let's take Stairway to Heaven, for instance. At a certain level, I was just thinking, I've never played that song for my son. He takes guitar lessons every week.
Yeah.
He goes twice a week, and it hasn't he enjoys it when he's doing it, but it hasn't grabbed him yet. That was one of the reasons I was wondering, all right, when did you first feel passionate, beyond the trumpet? Because I'm wondering to see. I think it will, the first time I really saw him get interested in music, that on a different level, because I think he enjoys it, and we play it. He's exposed to a lot of different music, both from both of us and from his guitar teacher.
Sure.
But one time we were having dinner and we had The Wall playing.
Oh yeah.
And usually once we're done with dinner, he takes off, goes back to his room, does his thing, But that night he sat there and he listened to the whole thing.
Okay.
And I saw it grab him somehow.
Yeah. How old is he now?
He's 12 now.
Yeah.
And this was maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah. So I'm interested, hoping
yeah.
that it will, and I'm sure whatever is supposed to grab him will, but
yeah.
in terms of, say, Stairway to Heaven and kind of like the background you gave us on Jimmy Page, he wrote, how much did he write of that song?
Well, he wrote the music, and then
Plant wrote the lyrics?
Yeah, John Paul Jones had some ideas, like that flute part in the beginning is John Paul Jones.
Uh-huh.
And Plant wrote the lyrics, but he just kind of wrote them right away. It came really quickly, and that's kind of a sign of invocation, because one of the key things to invocation, and partly what you're trying to do in ritual magic when you're building up to the invocation, is you're trying to go beyond the rational mind.
Yeah. And
you're trying to not think, and just when you do that, then things just will come in. But it's your own mind that kind of blocks out some of the cooler stuff. And my main mentor in the recording studio was this guy Bill Laswell, and that's not only him. Dylan uses this technique too of getting musicians to play the song before they really know it, because they're not thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's just, and when you're doing that, it's coming from the heart.
Right.
And that is actually the heart, opening the heart, I would say, is the basic essential of Crowley's magic.
That's beautiful. Just want to clarify, just so people don't think I'm a bad parent and I haven't exposed my son to Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
We just haven't exposed him to Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, I can already see the letters coming.
I want child protection services after me, So what I was going to go into about that, though, is because that became like what some people consider the greatest rock song ever, the most popular, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
Most radio plays.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And it's long, and it doesn't have the format of a popular song.
Right.
And that makes me think there's magic involved, not just because it's long and it got really popular, but because everything else we know about it, that invocation, sometimes something happens that the sound current is able to penetrate the environment in some sort of transcendent type of way, and it certainly seems like it did that. And that, going back to music and how it affects the consciousness of people on a much more subtle and perhaps important level than just brings us all together with our lighters up in the air at a concert. Something's happening even more substantive that is transcendent, that affects consciousness, when I think, in particular, invocation, and using the language you introduced, is done really well.
Exactly, yeah. And
it seems like the majority of, at least the music I love, is all coming from that space.
Yeah.
So
because it's connecting you with, like I say, I think the invocation gets recorded. It's they have an invocation and it's there. And so if you're receptive to that, you pick up on that connection. And
that's something you're mindful of, sounds like, all the time in terms of your profession as a recording engineer.
Yeah.
And so you're doing whatever you can, at least what's appropriate, and whatever, because sometimes you're in other people's studios, right?
Right.
You can't go in and with your magic wand and create pentagrams and so forth, or can you?
No. There is an interesting story where I felt I had to do that at a studio because there was a technical problem and it wasn't addressed. The text had said it was user error, and I knew it wasn't user error. And this was with Bill Laswell again, and it was one of the first or second times I'd worked with him, and I knew that if the session crashed again, that they would leave and I wouldn't have this connection. So I came in 2 hours before. So if you go in and you're all by yourself,
you can do some stuff.
And I did some ritual stuff and thought really good, positive things for the whole session, and it worked.
Yep.
And then the very next session, there was a big project, and the room crashed because there actually was a technical problem, and that project pulled out.
Right, because those type of things absolutely affect how things are working and what's happening. And like, to me, it's like, isn't it awesome, like, to have that awareness and to actually be able to influence things on the subtle plane?
Well, it is awesome, but you start, because another part of my background I haven't mentioned is that I've been a flotation tank user for a long time.
Yeah, Simrit's mentioned that too.
Yeah, since the late 80s. That was my form of seated meditation.
Mm-hmm. What is that, by the way? I know a little bit about it, but can you describe how that works?
It's a like tank of water, like the older ones look like almost like a casket or a tomb or something. And it's filled with 10 inches of water, saturated with 700 pounds of Epsom salts. Oh. And so you just float. There's a jacuzzi heater, so it's heated to skin temperature. And it's completely dark. The whole idea was to...
You covered? Is it encased in something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're in total pitch black darkness.
So not for claustrophobic types?
No, although it's almost like that's a fear that you might have, but once you're in there, you don't feel claustrophobic, because the idea was to attenuate all the senses so that you could go... leave the body. Your body wasn't a hindrance. Wow. You put in earplugs to try to cut out the sounds and stuff. Yeah.
And so you have one of these at like your house?
I've owned one since '89 or something. I had a situation where I had to do a short sale on my house, so I have it in storage. But I deliberately moved to a farm where the company who makes them is located, and they have like a trial version for people to check out. Like they have a tank house set up, and so I get up every morning super early and I go and float.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's like your meditation practice.
That's my meditation practice.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And so there's no music, no nothing. It's just your complete sensory, what's the word? Is it deprivation, or is that the wrong word?
No, it's sensory deprivation. Yeah. They call it sensory attenuation also, because you're not completely deprived.
Yeah, it seems like a little, like maybe too constricting of a semantic, deprivation. Yeah. That's, wow. And so it brings you into some sort of meditative state, and then you stay there for however long, and then you go on with your day? That's essentially how it works? Well,
there's, I've been doing it for over, I don't know, more than 20 years, 25 or something. And there's many different aspects to it. But the reason I brought it up is because you said, well, it must be fun to be able to influence things magically.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you end up realizing there's a lot of very, very powerful forces out there that are way more powerful than human. And not all of them are pleasant.
Sure.
And it is cool to be able to do that, but you're also, the more you learn and the more you do, the more responsibility is given to you, and you're always kind of like trying to keep up. It's almost like you're always feeling like you're going to be slightly overwhelmed, but you're not, and that so it's almost like you're never given challenges that will completely wipe you out, but you're always up against it as feeling as if you were. So yes, it is really cool, but it also comes with a great deal of responsibility. And I mean, I can tell you an experience I had in the tank of just a lot of the times it's not focused meditation, it's just kind of letting the mind wander. And for some reason, I hit this space where I completely felt the full effects of the Holocaust. And I felt it from the Jewish side, and then I also felt it from the German side, and it was both incredibly horrific. And up until that point, I had really no connection with it because I wasn't raised Jewish, and it was something that happened and all that, and it was a horrible thing and all that. But I now have a firsthand experience of it. But I forget where I was going with this. Yeah, you asked me if it was cool to be able to do that. Oh yeah, I know what I wanted to say was that So on this last Simrit tour, I'm writing a blog. It's taking me longer because I'm so busy, but you'll read it. And when we got to the first day of rehearsal, the mixing board was just crazy.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, and it was something, when Simrit had first asked me about touring last spring, she had mentioned this symptom that it had, and it was doing that. And I had thought it was an inexperienced sound engineer, but it was actually the board. And so I spent the whole day in what for me was hell, because I was having to study manuals and look up YouTube tutorial videos and do all this technical stuff. And I wasn't able to solve it. And so I resorted to magic, and I came up with the idea of naming the board and granting it entityness. And that's all based on my experience with magic. And it ended up working. There was never a problem with the board that it compromised any of the shows.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you this other asset that you're able to have. And it also comes with, kind of, as you're saying, a liability.
Yeah.
Certain liability has both.
And responsibility.
Any of these privileges has, and it's a privilege.
Yeah.
But, that's like in business, our business, we're working on that level all the time.
Yeah, you're getting that too, I'm sure.
It doesn't make sense not to.
Yeah.
And all that's going on anyways, regardless of whether I'm aware of it or not.
Yeah, and I'll just speak to that. As a Kundalini yoga teacher, you are invoking. Like when you are doing your workshops, I'm sure it's not scripted out. I mean, You might have points that you'll bring up and stuff, but I mean, I think you'll notice ideas and inspirations and where did that come from or whatever, and you're just tuning in to something, and that's the invocation. And someone told me something that I found very striking a long time ago, which is to pay attention to the invocation. So if you're up there, because I have a little bit of experience of teaching. I ran study groups in New York and stuff, and as you know, I'm sure teaching is a great way to learn because you're forced to be the guy that's presenting the knowledge, and therefore you have to know some of the knowledge at least. But it puts you in this position. You are taking responsibility for your students, and I believe that because of that responsibility, you're getting some of these forces I talked about are contacting you, and you're getting some of that.
Yeah, yes, and to your other point, there's a heavy weight with it.
Yeah.
And that part of it you don't see in the beginning part of the pursuit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You see what it looks like on the exterior, perhaps.
Right.
But you don't see the heavy weight, that people that I deal with, that you deal with, that anyone is dealing in the subtle realm.
Right.
Deals with. And yet there's no other way to go. I mean, there's not any other option, and I don't think, at least I personally wouldn't want it any other way. I would much rather be operating in the subtle than be kind of robotic in the dense.
Right.
And like, for instance, we're going to Peru coming up here, and none of us just don't really want to go, only because we're just travel, as we were talking earlier before we started this, we've just been traveling too much, so we'd much rather stay home. Yeah. The one thing that keeps me looking forward to going, and I'm able to direct my mind on when I start to get bummed out that I got to get on an airplane again, is I know I'm going to be in a position in the Sacred Valley teaching that I'm going to learn something. Yeah. And through that process of invocation, and that it's going to be an opportunity that I rarely get doing it in that particular time and space. Right. That I never get in that particular time and space, but that particular space. Yeah. And so it's really, it's the only way I'm able to stay interested in teaching. I would have to say that, because if I was scripted things, I would get bored very quickly. By now, I think I don't know if I'd have the juice to keep going. But because I'm very consciously unscripting, non-scripted, it keeps it eternally fresh. Yeah. And my teacher always said, if you want to learn something, read about it. What did he say? He said, if you want to learn something, read about it. You want to understand something, write about it. He said, if you want to master it, teach it.
That's profound. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just the point. I realized that I'm studying this. I'm into this French philosopher named Gilles Deleuze, and these books are just really hard. And as soon as I started writing down the salient points, and then it was almost like I would be writing down almost the whole book, which I did.
Yeah.
But just from writing it, it's what you said. I was able to understand. So doesn't even have to be creative writing, just kind of writing it down.
Yeah.
But I would say to you, have you been to Peru before?
No.
Yeah, because I find in my travels that location makes a big difference. That
Absolutely.
There are you said the Sacred Valley. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
There's probably a reason it's called the Sacred Valley. And there are some places on the planet that are more conducive to invocation and some that are less. And
no doubt.
I discovered that at a very early age, touring with bar bands in Western Canada. There were some hotels we played at where all I wanted to do was to smoke dope and get high. And then there were other places where all I wanted to do was like lots of yoga and magic.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an important teaching environment that can be more powerful than will.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, just a really quick break in our conversation to talk to you more about the Life Force Academy. The reason we originally designed the Life Force Academy was because we recognized, as I was traveling around and teaching the people of all walks of life, that the number one thing I think that people have the hardest time with is being consistent with a meditation practice or consistent with their yoga practice. And that's also the most important aspect of meditation or yoga practice, is consistency. You can have great effect from one single class or workshop, but the much deeper, much more fulfilling, much more substantive effects of yoga and meditation practice come when you have consistency in your practice, that you have a personal practice that you can do from home. And my experience is, if you're going to be consistent, you have to maintain inspiration. You have to feel inspired. Your mind is connected to the real deeper reasons we do this stuff in the first place. And that's what the Life Force Academy is all about, is we have various pillars of the Academy for different purposes and aspects of your life. If you want to do something real quick to get a reboot, I'm having low energy midday and I want to go in there, reboot my system so I can finish up the day's work with a good freshness, clarity, energy. You got a power practice for that. If you want to wake up in the day and have good energy to start your day, feel fresh, feel clear-minded, open-hearted, inspired, you do the Wake Up series. If you want to do a real good yoga class with real powerful exercises, deep meditation, and go deep into the teachings at the same time, there's awesome yoga classes. Not just yoga class, or just random yoga classes, but all of them are set up in thematic series, so you can work through each series in the Life Force Academy. For instance, you can start with the Deathlessness series and being connected to have an experience of the part of oneself that never dies. It's the heart of yoga itself. Or you can do the Intuition series to develop your third eye, your intuitive psyche, stimulate your pituitary gland. You can do the Self-Love series. You can do the Prosperous Human series. There's many, many series, so you can do these full yoga classes. Each series has about 6 classes in them. And then you just gradually, one class at a time, work through all the series. It's a really powerful way to get into the teachings and into the practices. You can do the 40-day challenges. You can participate in the forum and connect with the thousands of other members in over 60 countries around the world. You can connect with me in the forum. Life Force Academy is real cool. Just go to the URL lifeforce.yoga, and as a listener of this podcast, you can begin a 14-day trial for just $1. And then if you get in there and you find out this is awesome, I love it, then after 14 days, it's just $25 per month. That costs less than 2 yoga classes at your local yoga studio. And if you find it's not for you, you can cancel anytime. Super easy to use. Anyone can use it anywhere in the world, no matter what your body type is or your age or flexibility or anything like that kind of stuff. Something for everyone in there. Go to lifeforce.yoga, type that into your browser to begin your 14-day trial. of the Life Force Academy. Now back to my conversation with Oz Fritz. Well, in regards to swinging back around a little bit, and so you, through whatever course of events happen, end up becoming a sound engineer, now a very accomplished sound engineer, and then have, you know, in the background, maybe not really the background, but just for a certain way of saying it, also this magician.
Uh-huh.
You know, I would consider you a magician because you're practicing magic, and it's integrated into what you do on an everyday basis. How do you think that that has actually progressed your career? This other aspect beyond you just being able to like know how to, you know, do good mic placements, and even your creativity in terms of, okay, how do we pull this? How do we, you know, use creativity to get a good sound?
Yeah.
What role do you think that the more magic side of what you've been involved in has propelled your career forward?
Oh, there's some specific things. First of all, I just noticed this mic slipped a little bit.
Yeah. Can you lift it up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, you know, when I was first trying to break into the sound engineering world, I did a lot of invocation of the god Mercury, because I saw music and sound engineering as communication, and that's
what Mercury is all about.
Yeah. And so I did a lot of that, and I don't know. Like I say, I think there are forces beyond us, and I don't understand how they work, but I think that synchronicities start happening where you just get connected with people that are going to help you. And I was fortunate to be connected with Bill Laswell, who is also into Sufism and magic, and, you know, Crowley, and Gurdjieff is another one. And I just think it was, there's a resonance that happens which you can't even rationally explain, but he recognized something in me. So it wasn't only that, but I was into floating back then, so I would float before going into a session. So I was always like super alert and really together, and also brought in the magic awareness, which he knew about, and he would work, like some of his projects were along those lines. So, I got calls from some of his clients saying, we want someone who's, you know, knows about alchemy and stuff like that to help us record.
Wait a second. He said that, or a client of his said that?
This was a client that I met initially through Bill.
I see.
His name was Ronald Shannon Jackson. He was a avant-garde jazz drummer. Mm-hmm. And then when we were mixing his record, I brought in a bunch of my books. I created like a small library in the studio because I knew he had that interest. So, nothing specific. I mean, when you're mixing, I consider that invocational, and you're always trying to break out of the box and not do your standard things that you would do. And
can you explain, because many people listening to this probably don't really know what what an engineer does in the studio. You're primarily an engineer, consider yourself, as opposed to producer?
Yes.
Okay, but you do some producing as well.
Yeah.
So what is the job of the engineer?
Well, I wrote a manifesto when I was starting out, and I defined it as the effective interpretation of the artist's vision. So generally speaking, the sound engineer is the one that helps the musician take their ideas and manifest it into a reproducible form. And so there are basically three main stages to that in the recording world, which is you record all the tracks, all the instruments, there's a thing called overdubs where you can add on musical instruments and ideas and stuff. And then the second main part is called mixing, and that's where you take everything that's been recorded, and that's the real creative side of it. Recording is sort of mainly, I mean, there is a creative aspect to recording, but it's mainly about capturing something well or in an interesting way. Mixing is where it comes together, and mixing can make or break it, and that's where you create the sonic landscape that it's going to end up being. And then the third stage is called mastering, and that's where you take the thing that you've mixed and just kind of fine tune it for mass production.
Yeah, so I was exposed to Bill Laswell, I think I was in college. Mm-hmm. And he's prolific, isn't he, in terms of... And I can't remember what album I had. It was a Bill Laswell album. He has his own stuff. But he's not famous for his own stuff as much as producing other people's records. Is that accurate or no?
Yes, I would say that's accurate, yeah. But you see, a lot of his productions are his stuff. So he's a guy who's never cared to be well-known, a public figure or whatever, never sort of self-promoted himself.
Was that a turning point in your career when you started working with him?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And you still, to this day, work with him?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And that connection that the two of you had in terms of mysticism was, you think, foundation for that?
Yes. Yeah. He gave me chances where I felt I was being put into situations that I wasn't quite ready for. Mm-hmm. Because I had only interned I was assistant engineer for 3 years. Well, that was actually only about 2 years before I met him. Then I started assisting for him. Then, you develop a relationship because they always keep the same assistant with the same producer. And then there were times where his engineer couldn't make it, so I would jump in, and you could see that I knew what I was doing. And one of the big breaks he gave me was recording the master musicians of Jujuka, which it's another interesting story because I heard about them at the age of 12 of being this mystical. They were Sufis in Morocco, and their music was so magic or so powerful that it couldn't be recorded. That was like the legend. And because Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones had gone out there and recorded them, and some historians consider that the first example of world music, which means Europeans or Americans going to other places and recording their folk music. Yeah. Anyway, Ornette Coleman had been there in the 70s. He was fascinated by their music, and with a Brian Jones recording, it was recorded okay, but when he mixed it, like I say, it can be make or break, and he was trying to recreate the sound he heard in his head, which he tricked it out with like lots of crazy effects, so it wasn't an authentic documentation of their sound. Anyway, fast forward to late 80s, and because the Rolling Stones connection, the main leader of the group, and these are poor farmers basically, right? Or they live in a village that had no electricity at the time. They contacted the Stones again, and the Rolling Stones did go out there and did some recording, but they only used like 30 seconds or something like that on their Steel Wheels album or something like that. And anyway, word got to Bill Laswell. He has a connection with the Stones, and they asked him, and he was able to bring a $50,000 budget to recording them, and which he gave $35,000 to the village, and spent the rest just doing it. Anyway, I was supposed to be the assistant on that project. The main engineer was a guy named Billy Yodelman, who had been at Woodstock helping to record Woodstock, and he'd been one of the earliest. He had accompanied Mick Fleetwood to Africa, which was one of the, again, first times a Westerner had gone over there. He was a real veteran guy, and I think he decided it would be too much of a hardship, so I got the gig. Bill's like, "Oh, how would you like to do it?" And I'm like, wow.
You ended up going to Africa anyways.
Well, I was going to go, but I was like the main engineer on it, and it was...
Well, meaning that as a young teenager,
right.
You thought maybe you'd go to Africa.
Yeah, no, I got to do all the traveling, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, people can hear that album, yeah?
Yeah, it's called Apocalypse Across the Sky. I was in Morocco a couple of years ago, and we went to Tijuca again, and Bashir Attar is their leader, and he says that's still the definitive album of their music. Because for one thing, they have different styles of music, and a lot of people that use their music, you can hear their music also in the film called The Naked Lunch, based on the William Burroughs book. But on that album, it has all their different styles of music.
Who have been some of your favorite artists that you've worked with?
Tom Waits.
Tom Waits, yeah.
Yeah.
And with Tom Waits, I don't know a lot of Tom Waits' music. I'm familiar with him. I seen him live once at the Bridge School benefit, Neil Young's Bridge School, and it was cool.
Yeah.
Without knowing anything about him at that point, he was like, wow, this is different.
Yeah.
And there was definitely some invocation happening with that guy.
Yeah, he's very invocational.
Yeah, so what do you like about working with him?
He's like a Zen master. He had as much influence on me as Bill Laswell.
Really?
Yeah, he's someone you always have to be paying attention to. There's nothing rote about it. And also in New York, working with Bill Laswell, there was a particular aesthetic with their engineers, which is to try to make everything as big and powerful as possible. And with Tom, that wasn't the case. He kind of was one of the purveyors of lo-fi music, which is, it sounds, maybe like an older recording, or, because it's not just recording anything that sounds distorted, but it's using distortion in a creative way. Or, for instance, he would sing through a bullhorn. He would do things to make his voice not as big sounding.
I see.
And I was just talking about this with an engineer up in Portland. There's a song called Hold On Mule Variations, where I mixed it, and it's a beautiful song, and Tom had put all these extra guitar parts on that, not from him playing, but from other guys, and I mixed it, and it just sounded so beautiful, and Tom was like, this sounds great, but and this kind of his character, it doesn't really make sense, but he says, someone like Rod Stewart is going to hear this song and have a big hit with it. And so basically he wanted me to remix it without it sounding as beautiful and pretty. I see. But it still came out.
He wanted it dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Amazing. And that song got a Grammy nomination for Best Male Vocalist.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The engineering, too? Did you get that recognition in that?
Well, it's considered part of it. There is a separate category of best engineering, which that wasn't part of. It was in the best, folk songs or something.
I see. Cool.
And it was nominated. He didn't win, but the album itself won a Grammy.
Oh, cool.
For best contemporary folk album.
Oh, great. Did you get a Grammy for that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Did that help your career in any way, the Grammy Award? Or is it just kind of a token?
It's a token. I gave it to my mother.
Oh, cool. But that's what a wonderful thing to be able to do.
Yeah. Your son did something. Yeah.
You got a Grammy. That's cool.
Yeah. If my grandmother would have been alive, I would have given my Grammy to my Grammy. But it wasn't so much the Grammy, but it was working with Tom Waits got me tons of work.
I bet.
Because there are so many people who want to sound like him, and so they would contact the engineer.
He has it's not maybe right to call it like a cult. He has bigger than a cult following, but it is. It's like the spirit of his following is like, people are serious. If you're into Tom Waits, like you're all in, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like the Grateful Dead in that way.
Yeah.
If you're into him, like you take the deep dive.
Yeah, and he has that quality of, like I say, a Zen master, or someone that's very charismatic, where the people who are working for him just want to go all out and do their best. I can remember.
How old is he? Do you know?
Yeah. I want to say, 99, 50. So I would say mid to late 60s. Yeah, and as far as I know, he's kind of lays low in the last few years. I'm not really sure what he's up to.
How many albums have you done with him?
I did 3 of his, and then he produced one for John Hammond Jr., which was really successful. And then I did a VH1 Storytellers with them, and then we did a number of songs
I'd like
for
to
films.
watch that. Some
Yeah.
VH1 Storytellers. I always like those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. What a cool experience.
And I did live sound for them, too. I did a couple of tours with
on
them.
tour. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, that's the nice segue. How's it been doing? I read your blog, the first blog you wrote about the Simrit tour.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was a super entertaining read.
Oh, cool.
And I got a lot of insight, like a lot of, I kind of metabolized some of what she does in a similar way as you explained them. But, I'm so close to her. And that hearing it from a distance, a relative distance, from somebody else was a really cool experience for me.
Right.
And I just thought it was well written. And I've read a lot of your blogs, actually. I recommend people check. What is your blog, by the way, the URL?
I do not know. It's called the Oz Mix. And
Oz Mix.
if you do a Google search of the Oz Mix, it comes up right up.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what's it been like doing the Simrit tours?
Well, touring in general for me is a love-hate relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the blog, and the reason I started the blog is because I'm trying to write a book,
right.
and so the blog gives me a reason to practice, and that's kind of where my passion is these days, is writing. But for touring, it's pretty time-consuming. It takes all your time. And the times that you're on stage playing music, it's like you're in heaven. It's just you're doing your thing. You're kind of outside of your personality. You're part of this musical invocation. And, and then the rest of it is more difficult. I'm 58 now, so traveling isn't as easy as it was.
I wouldn't have guessed you're 58.
Yeah.
I think the float tanks are working.
Yeah. Well, on another podcast, we can talk about my theories of time.
Let's do that. Yeah.
So what's really great about the Simrit group is that they're all really great people, and if I can find a place, I want to touch on that in the new blog about the idea of the importance of friendship and trying to get something done. And so I haven't written it yet, so I don't have much more to say about that. But it's like at the time there's like small things that irritate you or whatever about the touring and stuff, and there's always, and that's one of the sort of aspects about friendship, is that there's friction between friends too. If it's but by the end of it, it's just a really positive experience. Glad to have done it. I look at, with a whole mystical angle, you're looking at, well, what effect, the reason I can work with Simrit is because she, her music helps my agenda of spreading love into the world. And so I'm always like, I think in that blog I would write about synchronicities and stuff, and to me that's kind of a confirmation or an indicator that there is an invocation there, that it's real, that you're not just imagining it. And one of the powerful things for me was the very last show, where Simrit was given a request to do a death prayer for someone. And when she did it, it was like a departure from the normal set. I had her vocal turned up loud from the song before, and she just laid into it. Her voice was really loud. She was playing the harmonium. Shannon started in with a cello drone, and it was just, you get goosebumps in the space. It was just really powerful. I think it was Shannon was on the verge of tears from it. It was just a powerful, moving experience. And then getting back to the hotel at night, and I turn on CNN. It's part of my World Watch work, and seeing it was just totally surreal and abstract, because this was the night of the Las Vegas shooting, and I correlated the timelines, and Simrit did that chant about an hour before this guy unleashed on this crowd, and it reminded me of a shaman I'd heard about or talked to around the time of 9/11, and he said that when 9/11 happened, that he went out of his body and traveled to New York to tell all these people who were dying, their souls, what was happening. That's another area I'm very interested in, is death and dying. And so if you die in a really sudden, unexpected way, I mean, you just go to the office and, you're never going to think that 2 planes are going to crash into your office building, and all these people were dying, and so he was communicating, this is what's happening. And so I saw that as kind of similar to what happened with Simran and doing this death prayer. It wasn't just for that person that she'd been requested for, but the timing of it was so synced to the event.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really enjoyed about reading your blog of their tour and the last spring tour, and the synchronicities and how well you're tuned in. I find when I travel, I find that synchronicities tend to accelerate. Or at least I'm more attuned to them. Yeah, and perhaps that has to do with various things. But you were using it, and each one of these, everything we talk about brings up some new thing. We'll wrap it up here soon, but I did want to ask you about this. You use the term the Bardo, which I'm loosely familiar with in terms of like from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Yeah. And you were using it in, or at least how I interpreted it, you were using it in regards to, so synchronicity would say, there would be some synchronicity, I can't remember any specifics, and we're in the Bardo. You would kind of say like that, right? We're in the Bardo. But describe that concept, the Bardo, or synchronicities, and how that relates to the...
Well, the Bardo is a word from Tibetan Buddhism, and it means the between lives states. So in their belief system, when you die, you do not immediately take rebirth. You go on a 49-day journey where if you're conscious enough and you're able to handle it, and the Bardo, that is the Bardo. It's the... it's
between.
Yeah, after you've died, before you've taken rebirth. So you talked about yoga being based on sound, which it is. That's my understanding of it too. And the Bardo Thodol, which is the name of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, means liberation by sound. Yeah. So they believe that the priests can do readings, which are basically instructions to the departing soul, saying, well, that monster that you're seeing, that's not really a monster, that's your subconscious unraveling, and if you just chill, it's not in those exact words, but you keep cool and you'll be able to get through it or whatever. So the goal is to get off the wheel of death and rebirth, but if you take the bodhisattva path, you consciously take another incarnation so that you can help everyone else get off the wheel, because in their belief system, no one is really enlightened until everyone is enlightened.
Indeed, right. Yeah, I was familiar with the term within that context, but I really enjoyed how you recontextualized it in a certain way in regards to you're on tour, as like, all right, we're in the Bardo. Right. And I thought that was, I liked it. I liked it a lot, because that's it, isn't it? It's like that death isn't some future circumstance. It's like everything is, as in the Carlos Castaneda books, he always says, death is always right to your left. Yeah. It's your closest advisor. Yeah.
And I've encountered resistance in, presenting these ideas and stuff, and people will say, well, it's morbid to be worrying about death. But actually, the Castaneda analogy is great, because if you ever have a near-death experience, you're going to feel the most alive that you've ever felt. Right. So, thinking that you're about to die, just all of a sudden time will slow down, your senses will just be, massively enhanced and whatnot. Some people feel that if you're, because I do have that background of my father being a scientist and always trying to find possible scientific materialistic explanations, and that, so they say just before the brain dies, time really slows down, and you have these experiences that seem to you to last 49 days or whatever it is. Whereas in our consensual time that regular people are experiencing, it might be a few seconds or a few minutes. There's a book or there's a movie film. I don't unequivocally recommend it, but it's not bad. It's called Jacob's Ladder, and it looks at some of that sort of Bardo situations. So, but Bardo, it's not just for people who are dying, because this gets back into magic too, is that every time you enter a different space, you're being reborn in a particular kind of way, right. Because your environment affects who you are. Yeah. You are a different person when you're in a church than when you are in a bar or somewhere else, or you're a different person when you're with your mother than you are with your friends or whatever. The environment, it plays into what you're doing. So traveling is something that's, and you see, a lot of my information comes from the third major influence in my life after Bill Laswell and after Tom Waits is E.J. Gold, and he's the reason I moved to California. And he wrote a book called The American Book of the Dead, which is an American translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And he says, and I agree, is that whenever you're traveling, when the Jai Dev that's here right now is going to die when you get on that plane and go to Peru. And then you're going to take a rebirth in Peru, and it's going to be the Peruvian version of Jai Dev, right, until you go through another change.
That's profound.
Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates real. Yeah, that's cool. E.J. Gold?
Yeah.
Cool. He lives in this area?
Yeah, he lives in the Penn Valley area, yeah.
Cool. I'm going to check it. I feel like we really just hit the tip of the iceberg, but we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. This was really...
It was my pleasure. You asked great questions, and this is very helpful for me, too, because it gives me ideas to write about and stuff.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for listening, everyone. And that was a conversation with Oz Fritz. I really enjoyed it. Amazing person. Really grateful to have had that conversation, and perhaps we'll be able to get him on again. Take another deep dive sometime soon. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you could leave us a review and a rating, that would be super, super helpful. We'd love that so much. And thanks for listening. We got great episodes coming up. People I'm really excited for you to meet via this podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we'll be coming out new episodes really soon.